Black college sports and then some. We got it right here on HSRN The Network, the voice of HBCU sports.
You are listening to Green Talk for Brown Folks with Ryan Marshall on HSRN.
What's going on, everybody? This is another Green Talk for Brown Folks GTBF episode 4. Creating Comfortable Retirement Part 2. I'm your host, Ryan Marshall. I'm so glad to be back with you. We're talking about some of these retirement strategies that we have as far as trying to be able to retire comfortably. You know, I think a lot of people realize that maybe I'm not saving the amount of money that I want to be saving in retirement. And I think that's important to try to figure out prior to getting to your retirement, if you're going to be able to retire comfortably. And so that's what today's episode is all about. Is we talked about in part 1 just some general things that you can do to increase the amount of money that you can get in retirement, and some ways, some obstacles to that, and some things that you can possibly do. Today, we're talking more about some financial vehicles that you can use and kind of diving into it a little bit more. So we realize that many people save their money for retirement via employer-sponsored retirement plans. So when we're talking about the 401k, or if it's a 403b if you're a nonprofit or in education, or for 457 if you're in government or whatever like that. What's important is to know when you're saving money in your 401k, the type of contribution that you're doing. And so they're generally, most traditional 401ks are pre-tax vehicles. So that means that when you place the money and you have that as a contribution out of your paycheck most times, that money that is going in there is pre-tax. So it's being contributed tax deferred. So that means that money is going in there and is not accumulating any sort of taxes at all until the time that you need to withdraw that money later on. There are some employer-sponsored plans that you're able to contribute to a 401k after tax, or Roth 401k. And so not every employer-sponsored plan has the ability to be able to do that. I check with your plan to see if you have the ability to do this. But if you have the ability to be able to contribute after taxes, then I think it's something definitely to consider. Most people, when they think about saving, they save in their 401k and don't realize that they can contribute after taxes. So that means that as you contribute, taxes are taken out there, and then you're able to grow that money, your contribution, and the growth that comes from that contribution tax-free. I think that's going to be very important, because we talk about the contribution of your money, your seed versus the growth from that contribution, which is your harvest. I think part of the way that you want to be able to grow your wealth is if you have the ability to grow after tax with your 401k. That would be a good way to go. Now, some people like the ability to be able to deduct the amount that they contribute in their 401k and their taxes in a pre-tax vehicle. It's something you can't do in your after-tax portion. But if we're talking about a 401k and contributing to it pre-tax, I think that some people like the ability to be able to deduct the amount that they contribute on their taxes each year. And so you have the ability to be able to do that. So let's say you contribute $10,000 in your company's employer-sponsored retirement. The $10,000, you have the ability to deduct that on your taxes. So if you've made $50,000 in a year, 10,000 of that is tax deductible. That's the upside to being able to contribute to a 401k pre-tax. It depends on the strategy that you want to go with, but I think what's important to note is we always talk about reducing the amount of taxes. And so I think in a strategy that I may use, it may be that I contribute, I pay the taxes as I go along, and then enjoy the growth of my money without it being taxed. Because what happens in that pre-tax vehicle is you save money, save, and then you get to a point when you're ready to retire and use it, and now you've got to be able to incur this tax bill that when you start taking money out, now that money that you get is going to be taxed at ordinary income rates at whatever income tax bracket you're at. And many financial advisors, many financial professionals tell you that, theoretically your income should be lower by the time you retire, and your taxable liability thus should be lower. But that may not necessarily be the case. People that, retire, may not necessarily have lower taxes. The contribution limit for both the traditional 401k and the Roth 401k, or the after-tax contribution, for 2021 is $19,500. If you started, or if you're contributing after 50, you have the ability to contribute an extra $6,500 as in the catch-up, and you can be able to do that. But those are the contribution limits for that. And some people may decide, hey, I want to be able to contribute as much to my 401k or my 403b or my 457 as I can. It's also important to note, when you're contributing, a lot of people may not be taking advantage of their company match. And so I think that's an important thing to note, is if you have the ability to contribute to your employer-sponsored retirement plan, contribute to your company match if that's possible. Some people, let's say the company is matching them dollar for dollar on the first 5% of their salary. So that would be, okay, if you're making $50,000, the first 5% of your salary would be $2,500. So that means that you put up $2,500 and you set aside $2,500. The company sets aside $2,500. You want to at least be able to get the maximum amount of your company match. And some people aren't doing that. So, like, let's say, for example, you're setting aside, I'm putting aside $20 a month, okay, or $20 a paycheck, which would be $40 a month. The company is matching you all the way up to $2,500. I think having that $40 a month and you multiply that times 12 would be $480. So obviously, if the company is matching you dollar for dollar, then you put up and contribute $480. They have contributed $480, but that's far short of your $2,500 contribution. And so I think it's going to be very important, in order to have that comfortable lifestyle, minimally to start trying to contribute the amount of money to maximize the amount of money that your company is giving you. It's free money most of the time. And if you're not taking advantage of that, then you're just leaving money on the table. If the company is giving you the opportunity to do the employee-sponsored retirement plan and they're matching you and you're not hitting your match, then that could be something that can hurt your amount of money that you're saving significantly. So, try to at least save the amount of money to your company match if it's possible. If it's not possible, we understand. Setting something aside is good, but I think trying to hit that company match is going to be important. Coming up in our next segment of Green Talk for Brown Folks, GTBF, we talk about IRAs, traditional versus Roth IRAs, annuities, and something called RMD. What is that, and how does that apply to your retirement? We'll talk about that in the next segment. It's GTBF, Green Talk for Brown Folks, with your host, Ryan Marshall. I'll be right back.
You are listening to Green Talk for Brown Folks with Ryan Marshall on HSRN.
Welcome back, everybody, to Green Talk for Brown Folks, GTBF. I'm your host, Ryan Marshall. Okay, we're talking about creating a comfortable retirement part 2, and we're kind of diving into some ways that you can be able to set your money aside to be able to create a comfortable retirement, and some strategies that you can use certainly to be able to do that. And we talked about 401ks and contributing to your employer-sponsored retirement, pre-tax with your traditional, or maybe even after tax with your Roth 401k. There are also some other ways that we're talking about setting some money aside for retirement. And a lot of people think about IRAs, individual retirement accounts, traditional IRAs, and then Roth IRAs. And so traditional IRAs, the difference between traditional and Roth IRAs is obviously one is a pre-tax vehicle in the traditional IRA. In your traditional IRA, the money that you contribute is the taxes are deferred. So you are able to grow your money without it being taxed. But when you're ready to take it out, then that money is going to be, again, taxed at ordinary income rates. And there's no income limit for being able to contribute to a traditional IRA. There's also the Roth IRA, and I think that's a pretty popular way for people to be able to contribute to their retirement. And so the Roth IRA is a way for average everyday Americans to be able to find some tax-free savings, or tax-free growth of their money. So that means that the amount of money that you contribute to a Roth IRA has already been taxed, or it's assumed that it's already been taxed after tax. So then your contribution and your growth can be enjoyed tax-free. The catch with a Roth IRA is that it is contribution restrictive. So you can only contribute up to $6,000 per year in a Roth IRA. If you're 50 years or older, you can contribute an extra $1,000 to your Roth IRA. You do have contribution limits to the Roth IRA because it is a tax-free vehicle. So with a Roth IRA, it's contribution restrictive. You can only contribute a certain amount of money. Plus, it's income restrictive. So that means that not everybody can contribute to a Roth IRA. You have to qualify in order to be able to contribute to it. So the qualifications for contributing to your Roth IRA for single file earners for the year 2021, it's $140,000 or less adjusted gross income. For joint file earners in 2021, it's $208,000 or less adjusted gross income. So we have to remember that these are long-term vehicles. So when you're talking about setting aside money for your retirement, that means that the money that you save into your retirement needs to stay in specifically for your retirement. And so the IRS has designated the 59 years and 6 months, 59 and a half is that age that you have to at least keep that money in those retirement funds until or you get hit with a penalty. And so that penalty is 10%. And that's one of those things that you definitely want to be able to keep that in your retirement vehicle. There's one thing to note when it comes to a 401k, a traditional 401k or a traditional IRA, that you don't have with a Roth IRA or Roth 401k, is that when you are contributing to those are pre-tax vehicles. So you get the ability to enjoy tax-deferred growth on those vehicles. And that money is also tax deductible each year on your taxes. I think we talked about that. The amount of money that you contribute in your employer-sponsored retirement plan, your 401k, your traditional or a traditional IRA, you can deduct that on your taxes each year. On the other side, though, there's something to note that we haven't talked about yet, and it's something called RMD, or required minimum distributions. So unlike after-tax vehicles, those vehicles that have already been taxed on the seed and then you get to enjoy your harvest tax-free, with pre-tax vehicles, there is required minimum distribution. So you've enjoyed the ability to be able to not have your money taxed and have it continue to grow and grow and grow. You've had the ability to be able to have your money, the amount of money that you contribute each and every year, as tax deductible. But let's say once you get to retirement age, you don't have a need for that money. And I've heard some people say, well, you know what, Ryan, I don't need this money, so I'm not going to touch it. Well, Uncle Sam and the IRS doesn't allow that money just to continue growing tax deferred without taxes. At some point, they want you to be able to have that money taxed. So what ends up happening is this required minimum distribution. They require you to be able to take some money out of your qualified retirement plans by the age of 72. So that means that if you haven't taken any sort of distribution on that money in a pre-tax vehicle, you're required to take some of that money, a minimum amount, out of that account starting at the age of 72. You don't have that requirement with Roth IRAs or any sort of after-tax contribution in your 401k, because your money has started to be taxed as you've gone along on the seed. The government's going to get their money at some point, and that tax liability doesn't go away even after death. And so what ends up happening is, if that money isn't taxed, and let's say somebly passes away at 68 or 70 prior to that 72-year-old requirement for required minimum distribution, well, that taxable liability falls to your beneficiary, falls to your heirs. And so then before they're able to get any sort of contribution or disbursement of your money, that they have to pay taxes on that money. And what ends up happening is that money that they get is taxed at ordinary income rates, at their ordinary income rates. And so that's something definitely to think about. I know a lot of people really don't think about it when it comes to retirement, but that tax liability never goes away in a pre-tax vehicle. Coming up in our final segment, we're talking about annuities and how you can use them to protect yourself against outliving your resources. And as a precursor to our third and final part on creating comfortable wealth, we're going to give you an unexpected way that you can save for retirement tax-free. That's much more coming up on GTBF, Green Talk for Brown Folks. I'm your host, Ryan Marshall. We'll be right back.
You are listening to Green Talk for Brown Folks with Ryan Marshall on HSRN.
Welcome back to GTBF, Green Talk for Brown Folks. I'm your host, Ryan Marshall. Okay, let's dive right into segment 3 and talking about annuities, another way that you can save for retirement, and the different ways that you can do that with annuities. Overall, there's a qualified annuity, obviously the pre-tax, and then the non-qualified annuity. They're both tax deferred, but they're taxed a little bit differently. And so there's no contribution limits to a qualified annuity. And on the backside, the upside to that is that an annuity, if you have the ability to be able to turn on an income rider, so if you're older in age and you're getting close to retirement, or if you're at retirement and you need to, as a good way to protect you outliving your resources, you can use an annuity to create a pension for yourself. So even if the principal amount of your annuity has exhausted to zero, as long as you have an income rider generally with your annuity contract, you can continue to receive lifetime income payments to yourself. And that's a really good way of receiving income for a lot of people. Because obviously when a 401k runs out, when an IRA, traditional or Roth runs out and it goes to zero, that's it. There's no more money. That's zero. As opposed to an annuity can help you protect your wealth on the backside and protect you from outliving your resources. So there's qualified annuities, and qualified annuities are tax deferred. Non-qualified annuities are also tax deferred, but with a qualified annuity, the amount that you contribute to the annuity and the growth of it is all tax deferred. So you contribute that money to an annuity, and we'll get into the different types of annuities here in a second, but you contribute that money to your annuity, your contributions, your seed. And the growth that you get from that contribution that you make is your harvest. Your seed and your harvest are going to be fully taxed as ordinary income when you start to take that as income in retirement. Obviously, still the same deal with being able to keep that as a long-term vehicle, that if you obviously touch any of that money prior to retirement, 59 and a half, you're going to be subject to not only just taxes at ordinary income rates, you're also going to be subject to your penalty. There's also some other things that we'll get into as well, but just want to just keep it high level for now. Then there's the non-qualified annuity. So you can contribute to your annuity on an after-tax basis. And how that's taxed on the other side is that your cost basis. And so that's the amount of your contribution, the amount of money that you contributed. Your cost basis is tax-free afterwards. So it's like a return of the amount of money that you put into it. Your growth is still tax deferred. So that growth is still taxed at ordinary income rates. So in a non-qualified annuity, if you contribute after tax, and let's say you contributed over the life of your annuity $100,000, and that $100,000 annuity grew to $1 million. Well, the $100,000, which will be your contribution, your cost basis, your cost basis, the amount that you contributed, wouldn't be taxable, that $100,000, but the other $900,000 would. And so that's something that's important to know. It's a little bit different from an IRA or even any sort of employer-sponsored retirement like a 401k, a 403b, or anything of that sort. So that's different in that regard. The great thing about having potentially the annuities is, obviously we talked about it, the ability potentially, if you have an income rider, to set it up like a pension, to where you can get guaranteed income for life. So we're just getting started on our conversation about annuities and the different types of annuities and ways, and you can use that to protect outliving your resources. And we're also on the next show going to talk about life insurance and being able to use life insurance to help you save for retirement and supplement your retirement tax-free, and the ways that you can do that. That's a very creative way to be able to do that. A lot of different ways to save for retirement. But thank you very much for listening to Green Talk for Brown Folks, GTBF, Creating Comfortable Retirement Part 2. We'll have Part 3 next week. I'm your host, Ryan Marshall. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Green Talk for Brown Folks with Ryan Marshall on HSRN. Follow Ryan's social media on Twitter at Ryan H. Marshall and on Instagram, RHM WealthWave. You can also connect with him via email at ryan.marshall@howmoneyworks.com. That's ryan.marshall@howmoneyworks.com. Join him next Friday at 1 p.m. for another edition of Green Talk for Brown Folks.